Josh Gates is finally breaking the news about what truly happened during Season 7 of Expedition X. The cameras were rolling when the crew began their night in what was thought to be a normal investigation. But within hours, lights failed, radios went dead, and the team was rushed out under direct command. That episode never aired the way it was filmed. Today, for the first time, Josh reveals what forced production to halt. Before we uncover it, hit subscribe so you don't miss the truth. Season 7 of Expedition X was supposed to be the most ambitious season yet. Ratings were at an all-time high, and the production team had approval to investigate a location that had been repeatedly denied in previous years due to reported safety concerns. According to internal planning notes later referenced by crew members, this investigation was chosen because it was considered the most extreme environment ever featured on the show. The area was remote, heavily forested, and miles from any established road. Equipment had to be transported in by off-road vehicles and then carried by hand for the final part of the approach. Even before cameras were turned on, crew members reported electronic interference, including unexplained battery failure on devices that were brand new. As the sun began to set, Josh Gates arrived on site to personally oversee the start of filming. His presence indicated that this was more than a standard episode. The plan was simple on paper: establish base camp, record environmental readings, monitor potential high-activity zones, and then conduct structured tests overnight. But within the first hour of filming, atmospheric readings began fluctuating sharply. The temperature dropped several degrees in minutes, despite no change in weather patterns. Digital meters registered spikes resembling electromagnetic pulses. Crew noted what felt like vibration moving through the ground without sound. Josh reportedly paused filming and asked the crew not to speak as he watched the horizon. He later stated that the air felt charged and that the team was no longer observing. They were being observed. That moment was the first sign something was very wrong. The location chosen for the Season 7 investigation was more than just remote. It was restricted. Records show that in the early 1990s, the surrounding land was temporarily sealed off following a series of unsolved disappearances. Official reports listed them as lost hikers, but local residents insist the missing individuals were part of an unofficial geological survey group. According to long-standing rumors, search teams found their equipment neatly stacked near a rock formation while their GPS trackers continued transmitting from an area several miles away. No footprints, no signs of struggle, and no confirmed explanation. Before production began, Josh Gates met with a local historian who warned him not to film after sundown. The historian referenced an abandoned structure deep in the forest, once used as a weather monitoring outpost, which had reportedly been shut down after technicians refused to continue working there. Their reason, according to second-hand accounts, was that instruments recorded atmospheric pressure changes only when no one was present. When anyone entered, all readings went silent. Multiple log entries tied to older investigative teams referenced what they called whisper corridors, claimed to be narrow passages where faint voices could be heard repeating the same phrase. When questioned, each team member believed they heard something different. Despite these warnings, production continued, and base camp was set near the foundation of the former outpost. Within 30 minutes of setup, a field technician reported hearing what sounded like metallic scraping underground. Moments later, his compass began spinning without pause. Josh noted this in his field journals, calling it the first undeniable sign that this location had been waiting. That night, they would learn what for. As darkness settled over the site, the forest fell into an unusual silence. Normally, Expedition X crews record a mix of insects, distant birds, and shifting branches during nightfall. But on this night, environmental microphones captured nothing. No wind, no night calls, not even the faint rustling of foliage. Sound technician notes later described it as if the landscape exhaled, then refused to breathe again. The silence itself became the first recorded anomaly of the evening. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Josh Gates instructed the team to begin thermal perimeter scans. Using handheld high-sensitivity imagers, the crew swept the tree line in slow arcs, Standard practice is to detect warm signatures such as animals or human trespassers. What the cameras registered instead were shifting pockets of colder than ambient temperature, fast-moving, amorphous zones that briefly appeared, then vanished. One operator insisted he saw a vertical shape almost 9 feet tall pass between two trees, but the reading disappeared when replayed. He requested immediate recalibration. The device registered as fully functional. Around 9:30, lead investigator approached Josh with concern. She reported feeling sudden pressure in her chest, similar to standing at high elevation. 2 other team members noted the same discomfort seconds later. Radio checks were initiated, but several headsets experienced static bursts, even when less than 20 feet apart. Josh, remaining composed, asked for quiet and told his team not to move or speak. For nearly 20 seconds, everyone stood still. In the raw, unedited footage, the only sound picked up was what many interpret as a faint breath, followed by a single, low-spoken word that appeared just behind one of the cameras. The audio was unclear. Some believe it said, "Watch." Others, "Leave." One production assistant claimed it sounded like her own name, though she stood several yards away with no microphone contact. Josh did not immediately react, but moments after the playback, he quietly said, "We are not alone out here. Continue, but stay together." That command marked the turning point from investigation to containment. By 10:15 that night, the strange silence in the forest became more unsettling than any direct threat could have been. Josh Gates instructed the crew to relocate toward a densely wooded ridge, where activity had previously spiked, according to their daytime electromagnetic sweeps. Before moving, the audio engineer replayed the earlier sound captured near the cameras. This time, he isolated frequencies beneath the normal range of human hearing. When amplified and slowed down, the whisper transformed into a fragmented sequence of syllables. Several crew members stepped back as they listened. The phrase registered as 5 distinct sounds, similar to "You should not stay." Despite opinions differing on the exact wording, every person present agreed that what spoke did so with intent. Tension rose sharply. Josh insisted on remaining objective and reminded the crew they were there to verify, not dramatize. Still, protocol required escalating to a controlled formation. Cameras were set to full spectrum mode. Motion sensors were redeployed in a circular pattern around the staging area, and all crew members were ordered to maintain constant visual contact with at least one other individual. At 10:30, the first uncontrolled environmental anomaly occurred. A metal equipment case, secured atop a flat support near the base of a tree, slid nearly 3 feet across the ground without human contact. The ground was level. There was no slope, vibration, or visible cause of movement. 2 cameras were pointed directly at the case. One recorded the slide. The other, positioned at a slight angle, briefly lost focus in what later appeared as a distortion wave moving outward from the center of the clearing. Within seconds, a second shift was recorded. A thermal imager mounted on a tripod rotated on its own and pointed directly into the darkness. Crew accounts state its lens remained fixed on a single location for nearly 5 seconds before a sudden temperature spike was detected. The heat reading showed an object approximately the size of an adult human, standing motionless in the coldest part of the clearing. Yet no figure was visible. Josh Gates approached the monitor and quietly asked if there were any nearby structures, roads, or power lines that could cause interference. The nearest access point was over 2 miles away. There were no known shelters, and no vehicles were registered entering the service road. As the thermal signal pulsed and then vanished, Josh turned to the field producer and said, "If whatever that is can move equipment, we need to reconsider our safety perimeter." Moments later, production halted movement into the ridge. Following the decision to halt advance toward the ridge, Josh Gates convened a rapid reassessment with the lead producer, the on-site safety coordinator, and the technical leads. The meeting took place under red lights to maintain night vision compatibility, with all filming briefly paused to ensure operational clarity. Josh Josh made it clear the objective had shifted from gathering evidence deeper in the site to understanding whether the risk present was reactive or intelligent. He suggested a controlled test. Instead of moving further into the woods, they would attempt environmental interaction from their current safe staging area to measure the response threshold. At 11:10, cameras resumed rolling. The team placed a series of objects at equidistant points across the clearing's perimeter. Simple, visually trackable items such as plastic water bottles, flagged markers, and a small battery-powered lantern. This arrangement was chosen deliberately, following a modified version of a behavioral deployment strategy used in Australian cave investigations, where suspected entities responded when movement patterns changed. The lantern was set to emit a slow pulse at 5-second intervals, while motion sensors tracked anything approaching within a 10-yard radius. Josh stood beside the lantern with 2 crew members, narrating their actions for documentation. He addressed the darkness directly, stating clearly that they would remain at the edge of the zone and inviting any force present to interact with the light. His tone remained steady and unemotional, following established Expedition X protocol for non-provocative communication. For nearly 3 minutes, nothing happened. The crew waited in complete silence, listening only to the rhythmic blinking of the lantern. Then, motion sensors triggered without visible cause. 2 bottles fell simultaneously, one striking the dirt with such velocity that it ricocheted and landed nearly 6 feet away. The lantern dimmed suddenly and then intensified, glowing far beyond its normal brightness setting. A camera, alarmed with what technicians later confirmed was a proximity alert from an unknown source. Audio equipment registered a burst of infrasonic energy consistent with high-frequency pressure changes. The impact of the energy wave caused 2 team members to stagger. One researcher reported intense ear pressure and mild dizziness. The lantern stopped blinking entirely and remained fixed in a solid beam, pointed at the staging tables. Josh quickly ordered all team members to move backward toward the vehicle line. As they retreated, new activity followed. A sudden gust of wind split the clearing despite still air recorded across weather monitors. The direction was highly localized, as if something moved past them. No voices were captured, but one microphone isolated what the sound engineer later described as rapid breathing directly behind the crew, though no one was physically present. At 11:17, the lead producer declared a stage red alert, triggering evacuation procedure. The stage red alert marked the highest level of emergency response, triggering full extraction protocol. At 11:17, all non-essential equipment was abandoned. Camera rigs were locked into stabilization mode and left recording as crew members formed into pairs and began moving toward the designated vehicle checkpoint. The safety coordinator took the lead, with Josh Gates positioned midway through the group to maintain communication as they retreated. Each member was instructed to report any physical symptoms immediately, both aloud and via body-mounted microphones. As they moved, the lantern, still abnormally bright, remained pointed directly toward the group. Multiple witnesses later described the beam not as projected from a stationary object, but as if following slowly, tracking their movement along the boundary line. No camera captured a mechanical swivel. The lantern itself did not move. The light simply adjusted angle without a clear point of origin. At 11:19, all 3 primary communications devices failed simultaneously. Field radios cut to white noise, satellite phone connections severed without signal loss indicators, and for the first time in Expedition X history, even the encrypted emergency locator beacon began transmitting intermittent errors. The tech team logged this breakdown as triple system failure with no environmental justification. Weather conditions remained clear, pressure stable, and no significant electromagnetic disruption was recorded at that exact moment. Josh immediately ordered transition from slow retreat to rapid extraction. No one panicked verbally, but audio logs captured heart rate spikes in multiple microphones. A ground-level camera picked up what appeared to be soil displacement moving parallel to the group, as if something large burrowed just beneath the top layer of earth. The motion persisted for approximately 12 seconds before stopping abruptly when the crew reached the gravel access road. At 11:21, one crew member experienced sudden chest constriction and had difficulty breathing. She was removed from the primary line and escorted to the nearest vehicle. A medic diagnosed acute stress-induced bronchial constriction. However, thermal footage revealed a cold mass surrounding her position moments before symptoms began. Temperature readings showed a drop of 10 degrees Fahrenheit localized to an area roughly the size of an adult human, though no visible presence appeared. Josh Gates documented the incident verbally while continuing movement, stating, "Evidence has escalated beyond controllable parameters. Full retreat is being executed for crew safety. Risk assessment requires immediate post-operation briefing." At 11:23 p.m., 3 vehicles departed the site. Recording equipment continued autonomously until battery failure at approximately 11:38. What happened during that 15-minute window, particularly what shut production down entirely, was discovered only after the review, and it forced Josh Gates to make a decision that would halt filming for the remainder of Season 7. In the hours after the emergency retreat, the entire Expedition X team gathered at the temporary command post, a secure mobile operations trailer several miles from the site. It was just after midnight when Josh Gates arrived, still wearing his field gear, his expression more focused than shaken. Production executives were connected via live call, and the team began reviewing the final 15 minutes of footage captured after extraction. Everyone expected flickering static, maybe some distant environmental noise. No one expected what they saw. Just over 1 minute after the last vehicle cleared the access road, 3 stationary cameras still recording inside the clearing captured visible disturbances sweeping across the ground like a ripple of pressure. The lantern, positioned exactly where it had been left, flickered once, then shut off, despite still having over 70% power. Seconds later, motion triggered the infrared camera near the equipment table. What appeared next lasted only 5 seconds, but was enough to force production to suspend all field filming. The image showed a tall, indistinct figure standing precisely where the crew had been moments earlier, its outline shifting like heat distortion. It did not approach the equipment. Instead, it turned slowly toward the direction of the departing vehicles before collapsing inward on itself, vanishing without lateral movement. Audio picked up a low-frequency exhale, so soft it was almost undetectable. When the footage ended, the trailer remained silent. Josh Gates spoke first, stating clearly, "This is no longer a survivability test. This is engagement without consent." He recommended production halt all overnight investigations until a complete review could be conducted, even if it meant postponing the remainder of Season 7. It was the first time Josh had ever made such a request. When Josh Gates issued the recommendation to suspend all field operations, the production room split into 2 immediate reactions. The field team agreed without hesitation. They had witnessed the event firsthand and felt that pushing further without a full assessment would be irresponsible. But the network representatives on the line hesitated. Shutting down filming mid-season meant major financial losses, contractual complications, and failing to deliver scheduled episodes. Silence stretched across the call until one executive finally asked if Josh believed the incident presented an actual physical threat or simply an anomaly worthy of higher caution. Josh didn't hesitate. It manipulated equipment without contact. It moved in ways not supported by technology or physics. It exhibited awareness, and it acted only after we engaged it. That's behavior, not background interference. With that, the discussion shifted. A temporary freeze was approved at 1:26 a.m. All on-site personnel were ordered to document detailed statements. A third-party risk specialist was brought in to review footage, along with a senior technical analyst from Expedition X's original engineering advisory board. Data began transferring to primary server storage for multi-field evaluation. What unsettled most involved was the unspoken acknowledgement that they weren't just responding to something unknown. They were reacting to something that had responded to them. Over the next 40 minutes, Josh drafted a preliminary incident report stating that future production in similar environments would require adjusted operational rules, including increased personnel spacing, earlier shutdown thresholds, and a mandatory buffer zone from active interference. He ended his report with a final note, one rarely used in field documentation. recommend strategic withdrawal pending clarification of intent. In the weeks that followed, Expedition X entered its most cautious operational phase since production began. Field segments scheduled for the remainder of the season were either postponed or shifted to strictly controlled environments. Josh Gates personally oversaw the preparation of all future shoot plans, insisting that no further expeditions continue until the incident was independently assessed and documented by outside analysts. Behind the scenes, major network discussions turned from scheduling to liability. A small working group was formed to determine whether the footage should ever be broadcast without major redaction. Internal review confirmed the figure captured in the clearing was not a camera error, compression artifact, or infrared malfunction. Its outline had measurable heat displacement but lacked identifiable anatomy. What alarmed analysts most was that its position aligned directly with the spot Josh had been standing before ordering extraction. In other words, it did not appear randomly. It appeared where they had chosen to test interaction. Following presentation of the report, Josh issued one final statement to the production board. "We encountered something that reacted to intention. If we go back, we must understand exactly what it was responding to." As of now, that remains the core question. Was it proximity, observation, or the act of engagement itself? Season 7 was not cancelled, but it was delayed. A clause was added to internal documents mandating that any similar field investigation must include a preliminary non-engagement phase before testing interaction. Some crew members chose not to return for future filming. Josh Gates has not publicly disclosed the full details of the event, but according to several staff members, the footage still sits archived pending final decision. Whether it will be shown, or whether it ever should be, remains unresolved. Moments ago, breaking reports circulated that an Expedition X crew member was rushed to the hospital following a horrifying incident during an episode that was never allowed to air. According to internal sources, filming was underway at a remote research location when something unseen triggered a severe medical emergency, forcing production to halt instantly. Josh Gates and the team reportedly watched it unfold in real time, but no footage was ever broadcast. Tonight, we are uncovering what really happened during the uncut expedition that nearly ended the show for good. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. Production records show the episode was set to investigate a location kept confidential even within expedition planning notes, referred to only as Zone 9. This place had been originally rejected by network standard protocols due to past incidents involving severe equipment loss and unexplained sensor shutdowns. But on this particular trip, producers believed they had new protective monitoring systems in place, and everything seemed safe. Josh Gates approved the segment after receiving clearance from an outside consultant, someone reportedly experienced in crisis management for high-risk field operations. That consultant later refused to comment when contacted. The mission objective was simple: detect environmental anomalies during a nocturnal atmospheric shift. Jessica Chobot and Phil Torres were scheduled to begin initial setup, while the rest of the team handled power routing to location beacons. The raw script described this as a standard recon before thermal mapping, but from the very moment the team arrived, nothing felt standard. According to the audio notes recovered from a secondary recorder, Jessica can be heard whispering that the air felt heavier than normal, comparing it to walking into a room right after someone had been screaming. At exactly 22:14 local time, long before filming officially began, 2 drone feeds suffered what appeared to be forced directional failure. Neither crashed, but both turned 180 degrees toward the tree line on their own. Crew attempted a manual override and received the same invalid input error twice. Production assumed it was a signal bounce and pushed forward, unaware a pressure drop had already begun across the site. The ground temperature fell in 6-degree steps at precisely 2-minute interval, as if following something artificial rather than natural. Despite this, Phil motivated the team onward, telling them sudden environmental changes often meant they were close to something big. Those words are now chilling in hindsight, because within the next 40 minutes, the team would realize this was not the start of a discovery. This was the start of something trying to discover them. What makes this incident stand out compared to other Expedition X investigations isn't just what happened, it's how quickly the situation derailed while still appearing completely calm to the naked eye. At 22:37, Jessica and Phil conducted a basic area sweep with thermal imaging. According to the pre-release field notes, heat signatures were normal, no animals nearby, no heat leaks from underground, and no visible structures other than the mobile base tent. Yet, the audio capture shows Jessica pausing mid-sentence and asking, "Are you hearing that? Because I don't know what I'm hearing." The sound logs reveal nothing abnormal. Her microphone didn't pick anything up. Seconds later, a motion alert triggered on camera 3 near the tree line, positioned roughly 20 yards from the monitoring tent. The recorded visual showed branches bending as if something large passed through. But the thermal overlay indicated no biological heat source, meaning whatever disturbed the vegetation had no identifiable body temperature. Phil initially wrote it off as air pressure change, citing that wind speeds had climbed. But that explanation quickly fell apart when a simultaneous sensor spike registered on the opposite side of the clearing, far from any wind exposure. Then the team noticed something no one could immediately explain. The live biometrics feed from one crew member showed an abrupt heart rate acceleration, jumping from 72 to 121 in under 3 seconds, despite him standing still and showing no outward signs of panic. He later claimed he felt like someone was standing directly behind him, breathing. In post-analysis, that same biometric feed displayed duplicate timestamps, identical minute and second entries with different heart rate values, an impossible data anomaly, suggesting the equipment was either malfunctioning or that environmental interference affected time tracking. The crew laughed it off at the moment, unaware that this was the first clear sign the expedition would not just fail, it would leave someone seriously injured before sunrise. The turning point came at 23:04. Not with something seen or heard, but with something felt. The monitoring tent suddenly experienced a pressure shift strong enough to visibly flex the fabric walls inward. Recorded on the exterior cameras, but notably not detected on any barometric sensor, Phil, frustrated and convinced it was structural instability, radioed the rest of the team to regroup and begin recalibrating their instruments. That's when the EM tracker began pulsing erratically, cycling between peak readings and total power loss every 4 seconds. The fluctuation was so extreme that wires began vibrating across the floor, as if responding to a rhythmic force. Crew member Daniel, responsible for stabilization checks, knelt to disconnect the power feed. Witnesses stated he recoiled instantly, gasping that the cable was burning cold. Forensics later confirmed the temperature reading was -12 degrees Fahrenheit, even though the rest of the tent remained at 61 degrees. Seconds after that contact, Camera 3, the same unit that had previously predicted motion without heat, completely detached from its fixed mount and dropped to the ground. The metal ring holding it in place snapped clean, not bent or stripped. A playback review later showed that just before the fall, a frame appeared where the camera's lens reflection caught a shape, tall and narrow, with no clearly defined movement. One technician, during review, muted the audio halfway through the recording, claiming he could faintly hear something breathing inside the feed. Then came the crew member collapse. Daniel, who had handled the frozen cable, staggered back, clutched his chest, and dropped to one knee. His heart rate surged past 160. The transmission log noted his last coherent statement before blacking out. "It's like it knows I'm here." For the first time in Expedition X history, the crew called for an emergency extraction signal, something reserved for catastrophic site failure. They thought that would be the end of it, but it was only the beginning. The emergency extraction alert activated at 23:09, triggering a protocol usually reserved for physical injury or environmental hazard. A secondary crew positioned half a mile west moved in for recovery. By then, Daniel's vitals were crashing. He was pale, cold to the touch, and murmuring incoherently. His oxygen saturation dropped to 68%. Critical failure level. Phil ordered all equipment abandoned except the primary data drives and instructed everyone to regroup at Vehicle Point Delta. But the path to the extraction zone was not clear. As they moved across uneven forest terrain, the air began to carry a faint metallic hum, the same fluctuating EM pattern recorded earlier, but now audible without instruments. Crew member Marissa reported a sensation of static running along her spine, followed by tingling in her fingertips. Phil began calling out distances over radio, trying to maintain formation, but half of his words cut off mid-transmission, replaced by a crackling tone that sounded disturbingly rhythmic, almost like slow inhaling. Then the radio battery packs began to fail, one by one, even though they were at full charge when the team departed. Tablet screens glitched, GPS repositioning them in places they were not physically located. It was as if their equipment believed they were still standing near the hot spot. Panic crept in. The forest around them remained physically unchanged, yet the path seemed to subtly misalign every time they looked back. At one point, the camera operator swore the trees had shifted position, like the landscape itself was trying to gently push them back toward the original site. Footsteps began to appear in the damp soil beside their route, fresh prints, 11 inches long, human-like but narrow, emerging parallel to theirs without anyone present. They were too deep to belong to any crew member. One technician attempted to snap a photo, but the image capture froze at 99% compression and then erased itself. Phil halted the group just 30 yards from Vehicle Point Delta as a sudden realization overtook them. They were no longer walking alone. Something unseen had aligned itself behind them, pacing their movements with impossible precision. And Daniel, still barely conscious, whispered one final phrase before collapsing into complete unresponsiveness. "It followed us." By 23:26, the crew finally reached Vehicle Point Delta, two rugged expedition trucks reinforced specifically for emergency retreats. Daniel was placed carefully across the back seat, while EMT protocol crew began a stabilized transport setup. He remained unresponsive, clinging to life with labored breaths and uncontrolled tremors. Everyone expected that once inside the protective shielding of the vehicles, the phenomenon would cease. Instead, for the first time that night, they realized the problem had changed shape. The moment the trucks powered on, a pulsing distortion appeared across the center screen of the vehicle's dash monitor. It wasn't part of their surveillance system. It was an internal system glitch. The distortion flickered into what looked like fragments of earlier camera footage. Frames from their abandoned camp appeared, overlaid with topographic grid lines that did not match any terrain they had crossed. It wasn't recorded. It was being generated in real time. Marissa quickly disconnected the external drives, fearing live contamination, but the pulse continued through vehicle software. Even the secondary ignition computer stalled for 3 seconds, displaying a single corrupted file name, docrep-v2 retry. The file didn't exist in storage logs. It was coming from memory systems that never touched field hardware. One by one, their digital panels began relaying unprompted data, audio clips of their own voices captured during previous expeditions, yet subtly wrong. In one clip, Phil's voice asked if the subject was stable, a phrase he never spoke. In another, Daniel's voice whispered, "It already knows what we think." He had never said that out loud. Further disturbance came when emergency telemetry in Truck 2 began rapidly replaying crew biometrics with latency, as if reading signals from several minutes in the future. Daniel's vitals displayed a pulse rate sharply decreasing before EMT sensors detected it. This preemptive reading proved horrifyingly accurate 7 minutes later. Phil made the call. No more electronics. The trucks went into manual override. All data drives were isolated inside Faraday bags. But as they sped toward base camp, quieter but no less alarming anomalies continued. The radio chirped spontaneously, not with static, but but with breathing, slow, deliberate, patterned. Only then did Marissa mutter what no one wanted to admit. It's not stuck in the hot spot. It's traveling with us. Daniel arrived at St. Francis Regional at 1:14 under priority intake. Listed as a neurological trauma patient, the ER team expected hypothermia or exposure to environmental toxins. What they encountered instead forced them to initiate a report deemed abnormal sensory distress, cause undetermined. The first red flag appeared during preliminary vitals. Daniel's pulse, previously irregular, stabilized to a calm rhythm, only to spike erratically whenever someone came within 3 feet of his bed. Nearly every nurse and technician experienced momentary disorientation when approaching. One reported a ringing pressure in the head, like being underwater. A respiratory specialist briefly forgot which hand held the oxygen mask. Medical imaging escalated confusion. The CT scan showed no brain trauma, no signs of viral or parasitic invasion, yet the system flagged an anomaly in the temporal lobe, pixels that registered motion despite the image being static. Technicians recalibrated the machine 3 times. The anomaly remained. Neurologist Dr. Ramirez noted the reading resembled not internal damage, but interference, like something external was trying to interact at the point of cognitive recognition. His statement was never officially added to the report. At 1:47, while preparing for MRI evaluation, Daniel regained partial awareness. He did not open his eyes, but his voice emerged abruptly, fragmented. Not in here, walls, listening. The words sounded strained, almost defensive. A nurse asked what he meant, but Daniel suddenly convulsed. For roughly 8 seconds, the heart monitor displayed no numerical readout, only static lines, while every overhead light dimmed simultaneously throughout the trauma wing. No emergency generator activated, and yet power returned, without any electrical record marking an interruption. Security footage from the hallway outside Daniel's room captured staff reacting to the dimming lights. But inside the room, the camera feed cut out for exactly 81 frames. When playback realigned, Daniel's bed had shifted 3 inches toward the wall. His limbs remained positioned as before, with no detectable movement in between. That was when hospital staff asked Expedition X members if they had encountered electromagnetic exposure. Phil hesitated before answering. No, he said. It wasn't the environment. It was following him. Once Daniel was stabilized under observation, producers instructed the Expedition X team to pull all field files from the last 48 hours for internal review. The mandate was quiet and urgent. No calls, no email trails. Jessica and Phil locked themselves in the on-site production vault to begin examining the raw data, with Josh Gates phoning in from a separate location. The objective was simple: isolate anything that suggested liability or negligence. But as they initiated footage transfer onto a secure system with no external network access, the first indication something had gone wrong appeared. Despite the drive being formatted 20 minutes earlier, a time-stamped folder labeled Repeat 0719 was already present. Phil swore he hadn't copied anything yet. Inside the folder were fragments of recorded audio and short video loops, some no longer than 5 seconds, showing the exact moment Daniel first stepped into the ravine. In the clips, the environment appeared normal, except for faint distortions at the edges of the screen, like the atmosphere was compressing inward. Each loop ended with the same distorted whisper overlaying the background static. Do not come back alone. They deleted the folder. Within seconds, it reappeared. Jessica wiped the drive entirely, disconnected power, and rebooted the workstation. Not only did the folder remain, it had multiplied, now displayed in alphabetical sequence, each titled Repeat, followed by different time markers not associated with the expedition. Some timestamps didn't align with any recorded material. Others referenced future times, dates, and hours yet to occur. They ran diagnostics. No malware, no file corruption. The files existed without logical creation sources. When they played one of the future timestamp clips, the video displayed their production room at night, filmed from inside. A chair sat in the corner, empty. In the reflection of the cabinet glass, however, a blurred humanoid figure stood behind the chair, unmoving. The date stamp indicated 2 nights from now. Josh, still on the line, went silent for 6 seconds before saying, "Pull the tapes, lock the vault. Don't watch anything else until someone higher up decides what we do." That instruction came too late, because the next time Jessica touched the monitor, the screen flickered and showed a frame she did not remember recording. Daniel's hospital room. The same whisper. It followed him. By the following morning, the atmosphere on site had completely shifted. Jessica arrived at base camp visibly shaken, clutching a printed copy of one of the future timestamp scenes. According to field logs, she didn't sleep. Phil had already contacted internal safety advisors, filing a detailed incident report that described Daniel's collapse as neurological trauma, possibly induced by environmental interference. The team pushed to suspend all filming immediately and return equipment to headquarters for full technical analysis. They argued that if the anomaly somehow affected physiological harm, the crew could be in imminent danger. That request lasted less than 15 minutes. The network's executive liaison joined the call and dismissed the stop work proposal. According to Jessica's later interview, the exec stated directly that the footage could represent the highest engagement point in the show's history, and hinted that they were already drafting a teaser for upcoming episodes. The fact that the physical injury occurred mid-expedition only made the episode more compelling. Phil immediately objected, reminding them that Daniel was under medical care and might face lasting cognitive damage. The response? You're being emotional. This is the risk of immersive investigation. Audiences understand that. The team was furious. Josh Gates, patched into the call from Los Angeles, reportedly went silent for several moments before firmly repeating the request to halt the expedition entirely. The network escalated instead, citing contractual obligations and insurance coverage, and instructed them to complete the last 3 field segments before withdrawal. They even assigned a remote marketing representative to begin condensing the hospital incident into potential promotional cuts, ignoring objections from medical staff. Jessica later admitted the most chilling part wasn't the exec's decision. It was the slight audio glitch that occurred right after the call ended. The power flickered inside the production tent. Every camera indicator light turned red for 3 seconds, as if they all started recording simultaneously, unprompted. When techs tried to review that moment later, no cameras registered having captured anything at all. That's when Phil quietly said, "It knows we're still here." And nobody disagreed. Daniel remained unresponsive for nearly 12 hours after being airlifted to a temporary treatment facility outside the forest zone. Medical tests failed to show signs of concussion, infection, or seizure. His vitals were stable, yet he wouldn't wake. It wasn't until late afternoon, just as the team packed gear to leave, that he suddenly opened his eyes. He didn't seem confused or disoriented, but disturbingly calm. According to Jessica, the room temperature dropped the moment he looked at her. He didn't recognize anyone else in the tent, not even the paramedics. He whispered something so faint she had to lean close to hear it. "It watched me fall, then waited to see who would come help." His voice sounded normal, but the words didn't. Jessica stepped back instinctively. Phil asked him what he meant, but Daniel only continued, "It's figuring out who's the next one." Then he stared past them. Not at a wall, not at ceiling, but at an empty corner of the tent where nothing stood. He began smiling, small at first, then unnaturally wide, as if trying to imitate the expression rather than showing real emotion. Moments later, alarms sounded throughout the medical tent. Every monitor attached to him displayed rapid spikes, not dangerous, but synchronized, as if responding to an external pattern rather than his physical state. The lights flickered once, twice, then power cut entirely for exactly 11 seconds. When it came back, Daniel had closed his eyes. He wasn't unconscious. He was sleeping peacefully, as if nothing happened. Within the hour, production leadership ordered a site-wide withdrawal. Not a pause, not a health and safety hold, an immediate evacuation. All footage related to the event was flagged maximum level containment, never to air. Internal reports concluded that unidentified environmental influence was responsible. The final note added by the network compliance officer was only 3 words long: footage not usable. But those who were there still insist it wasn't because the footage was corrupted. It was because it was too clear. The Expedition X crew was forced to shut down their investigation deep inside an uncharted sector of the jungle, and what they found out there is something the world was never supposed to see. A discovery so disturbing that production immediately halted, crew members were evacuated, and Josh Gates himself stepped in to confront what really happened. Tonight, we break down the full story: the audio, the thermal footage, the creature encounter, and the unexplainable event that nearly ended the entire Expedition X series. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe, because once you hear what they uncovered, you'll understand why the jungle wanted them gone. The journey began long before the cameras started rolling. Josh Gates had been hearing whispers for years, cryptic tribal warnings, satellite anomalies, and a series of disappearances the locals refused to discuss. All of them centered around one isolated sector of jungle, known only by a name that didn't appear on any map: La Zona Prohibida, the Forbidden Zone. Expedition X had filmed in extreme places before: volcano rims, abandoned mines, haunted islands, but this request from the network felt different. It wasn't a mission they volunteered for. It was a mission the locals begged them not to take. Every guide turned them down instantly. Some refused to even speak the name of the region. Others warned that people who entered those trees often walked out a different person, if they walked out at all. Finally, one elderly guide agreed, but only after making them swear to rules that sounded more like survival rights than instruction. No splitting up, no loud talking, no bright lights after sundown, no whistling, and absolutely never turn around if they heard their own names whispered from behind. Even Josh, who thrived on the unknown, felt a pressure in his chest as they stepped beneath the dense canopy. The jungle swallowed every trace of the outside world. Sunlight dimmed to a dull green glow. Humidity thickened, and the temperature rose until every breath felt like steam. Within the first hour, things went wrong. Their GPS units flickered, compasses spun in slow circles, and the boom mic recorded a faint frequency no one could identify. The guide stopped in his tracks, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. He whispered, "It knows." Jess and Phil exchanged glances, uneasy, unsure. But this was Expedition X, and they weren't turning back. Not yet. Far ahead, something moved. Not an animal, not wind, something deliberate. And with that single motion, their investigation crossed a threshold they could never return from. The deeper the crew pushed into La Zona Prohibida, the more it felt like the jungle itself was shifting around them, tightening, listening, waiting. Jess noticed it first. She stopped mid-step, raising her hand for silence. Her eyes narrowed at the tree line. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Phil didn't. Josh didn't. But the guide did, his entire face drained of color. It wasn't the usual jungle chorus. No birds, no insects, not even the distant rustle of monkeys. It was the absence of sound that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. A silence so complete it felt engineered, manufactured, intentional. Jess raised her thermal camera toward the trees. At first, nothing. Then, a shape, a form, cold, motionless, tall, humanoid. It stood behind a curtain of vines, just far enough away that its outline flickered like a glitch on a corrupted file. Jess zoomed in. The shape tilted its head. "Is that a person?" Phil whispered, but the guide shook his head slowly, trembling. "Not a person. Not anymore." Before they could get closer, the air changed. A low vibration hummed through the ground, soft but unmistakable. As if something enormous was moving beneath the soil, their equipment reacted instantly. EMF spikes across multiple devices, audio recorders capturing a deep rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat under rock. Then the jungle exhaled. A sudden gust of wind blasted through the trees, bending branches backward as leaves spiraled around them. Equipment cases slammed shut. Cables whipped across the dirt. The thermal signature vanished in an instant, evaporating like steam. And then came the whistle, a soft, deliberate two-note sound from deep inside the foliage, mimicking the exact whistle Phil had used earlier to call Jess over to check the drone batteries. The guide spun around, eyes wild. "No whistling," he hissed. "I told you." It calls back. Josh called out, "Who's there? Come out." Silence. Then again, Phil's whistle, perfectly copied, but this time much closer. The crew froze. Something in that jungle wasn't just observing them. It was learning them, repeating them, studying them like prey. And the worst part was still ahead. After the whistles, the crew knew they needed eyes in the sky. If something, or someone, was stalking them, the drone was their only chance to see it. Without getting closer, Phil powered it up, but even that didn't go smoothly. The drone's calibration kept failing, warning sensors flickering between obstacle detected and GPS interference. Still, after several resets, the machine finally lifted through the canopy. The moment it broke above the tree line, Phil's expression shifted from relief to confusion. "Guys, something's wrong with the horizon." Josh stepped beside him. Instead of the lush, uninterrupted jungle they expected, the drone camera showed something impossible. An enormous, perfect circle carved directly into the forest floor. No trees, no brush. Just an exposed ring of earth about 200 feet wide. Too smooth to be natural. Too old to be recent. Jess zoomed in. Her breath caught. In the center of the clearing was a network of symbols etched into the soil. Spirals, intersecting lines, geometric shapes that didn't match any indigenous markings they had studied. Some glowed faintly on thermal, radiating heat despite no visible fire or machinery. "How long has that been here?" she whispered. Phil nudged the drone lower. As he did, the audio feed began picking up a strange static, like whispering wrapped in distortion. Not voices, but patterns, almost coded. The symbols grew clearer. The team could see deep grooves, like they had been carved with precision tool. But by who and why in a place so remote that even the maps avoided it? Then, movement. The drone caught a distortion at the edge of the circle. Not a body, not an animal, a shimmer, like heat mirage bending the light around a shape that wasn't fully visible. It pulsed once, then darted behind the trees with unnatural speed. "What was that?" Jess gasped. Phil tried to pull the drone back up, but the screen glitched, then warped, then ripened into a violent cascade of static, as something slammed into the drone mid-air. The final frame captured a blurred silhouette, long, thin limbs, a reflective sheen across its surface. And then the feed died. The drone spiraled into the trees with a bone-cracking crash, and the jungle went silent again, as if waiting to see what the crew would do next. After the drone fell, Josh made the call no one wanted to hear. "We're retrieving it. Whatever hit that drone, we need to know what it was." The team pushed deeper into the jungle, following Phil's tracker. The humidity thickened until every breath felt weighted. Jess kept scanning the trees with her thermal imager, but the screen kept glitching, heat signatures flaring and vanishing like something was darting between the branches, too fast for the eye to catch. When they finally reached the crash site, the drone was crumpled in a bed of leaves. Its casing split open, its lens cracked inward, but the way it was damaged didn't match a fall. The metal was indented outward, like something had gripped it mid-flight and crushed it before dropping it. Josh crouched, running his fingers over the warped shell. "This wasn't an animal," he whispered. Phil didn't answer. He already knew. Then Jess called out softly, "Guys, you're going to want to see this." Just beyond the crash site, the jungle floor dropped into a shallow basin. Vines and moss had grown over the edges, but the shape was unmistakable. A man-made depression, nearly symmetrical. As they stepped down into it, the air felt noticeably colder. Unnaturally, impossibly colder. In the center was a stone platform, not a ruin, not debris, a constructed altar, its edges carved with careful precision. The stone was dark, almost metallic, and bore markings identical to the symbols they saw from the drone. Spirals, intersecting angles, and geometric shapes that didn't match any indigenous databases. "What is this doing out here?" here?" Jess asked, voice trembling. Josh touched the stone's surface. It vibrated, subtle but unmistakable, like a low-frequency hum pulsing from deep within. Not mechanical, not natural, something else. Phil pointed to the ground. Large tracks, humanoid but wrong, surrounded the altar. Not footprints exactly, more like where something had pressed into the soil with weight but without toes, arches or heel marks. Smooth, uniform, almost molded. Jess tapped her radio. "We should report this to command. This isn't just archaeology. This is—" Her voice cut off as the radios erupted with the same distorted whispering the drone captured. The signals swirled in their earpieces like mechanical breaths layered over distant speech. Josh slowly removed his earpiece. "They don't want us calling this in," he said quietly. The jungle, dense and watchful, seemed to close in around them, pressing, listening, as if the ritual site had been disturbed for the first time in decades, and something near it had finally awakened. The team backed away from the altar, trying to regroup, but the atmosphere had changed. The constant hum of insects, the ever-present background music of the jungle, had stopped entirely. No birds, no buzzing, no rustling, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. Jess whispered, "This is wrong. The jungle never goes silent." Josh lifted his camcorder, scanning the tree line. The foliage looked normal, but every instinct in his body screamed that they were being watched. Phil stepped ahead, his machete raised slightly, not as a weapon, but to feel the vibrations in the air. He could sense it too. Something was moving, but not through the brush above them. A faint clicking noise echoed from the canopy. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate. Not an animal, not mechanical, something in between. Jess aimed her thermal imager upward, but the screen immediately fractured into static before freezing on a single warped image. A tall, elongated silhouette crouched against a tree trunk, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. Then the screen went black. Josh's heartbeat hammered in his chest. "We're not alone out here," he said, barely audible. Suddenly, a crash erupted behind them. Branches snapped violently, as if something enormous had leapt from tree to tree. Phil spun so fast his pack nearly tore off. Jess raised her flashlight just in time to catch a streak of movement. Something long, dark, and disturbingly smooth disappearing behind the vines. They bolted. Josh led the way up the slope, but halfway up he froze, raising a hand to stop the others. On the ground ahead of them lay a trail of disturbed soil, like something had been dragging itself or being dragged toward a narrow tunnel-like opening hidden beneath a lattice of roots. Phil crouched and brushed away the leaves. The opening led underground, extending deeper than the beam of his flashlight could penetrate. Jess whispered, "Is that fresh?" It was. The earth was still wet, still warm. Before they could decide whether to investigate, the clicking sound returned, louder now, and coming from inside the tunnel. Phil jerked back instantly. "Nope, no way. That thing is down there." But then, from deeper inside the underground passage, a sound drifted out, low, guttural, almost human, like someone calling for help. Jess stepped forward. "It sounded like—" "No," Josh said sharply. "That isn't a person." The voice came again, closer. This time, it whispered Josh's name. Josh stumbled backward the moment he heard his own name echo from inside the tunnel. The voice was low, wavering, and carried a strange distortion, like it was being forced through layers of stone. Jess immediately swung her flashlight toward the opening, her breath trembling. Phil raised his machete instinctively, eyes locked on the darkness. "Josh, help!" The voice came again, this time unmistakably familiar. Jess gasped. "That sounded like the missing ranger, the one they said vanished last month." Josh didn't answer. Every rational part of him knew it made no sense, but the emotional reaction hit hard. He had interviewed that ranger's family. He remembered the voice, the cadence, the tone. This wasn't it? Not exactly. It was close, but wrong in subtle ways, like a recording played through damaged speakers. Phil crouched low, studying the tunnel. "This is mimicry. Nothing human moves like that, or sounds like that." His voice cracked with unease. Even he, the skeptic, was shaken. The jungle wind picked up suddenly, but the leaves around them barely moved. It was as if the air itself was being pulled toward the tunnel's mouth. Jess held out her hand and felt a faint suction, a slow inhale coming from the subterranean passage. Something down there was breathing. Jess whispered, We need to back away. Now. Josh nodded, but before they could retreat, a thin sliver of movement appeared in the tunnel, pale, bending, almost jointless. It looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long, too smooth. They moved independently, curling into the dirt like roots seeking water. Then the voice shifted, not pleading, commanding. "Come down! Come! See!" Phil grabbed Josh by the collar and yanked him back just as the fingers pressed further out of the darkness, dragging lines in the soil like they were testing it. Jess aimed her thermal camera again. It flickered violently, then locked onto a shape, something tall, thin, standing upright, just beyond the flashlight's reach. But the thermal signature was backwards. The coldest part was its center, while the outer edges glowed like heat was radiating away from the body instead of through it. "What is that?" she whispered. A sharp crack rang out behind them, something moving fast through the branches above. The creature in the tunnel jerked back instantly, retreating with inhuman speed. The clicking sound returned, rippling through the trees in a pattern, almost like a warning. Phil whispered, "We're being surrounded." That wasn't the only one. They turned to run, and the jungle lit up with glowing eyes. Jess froze first, her flashlight trembling as she slowly scanned the trees. One by one, small reflective eyes winked into existence, dozens of them, hovering between the branches, low to the ground, up high, scattered in every direction. They didn't blink like animals. They didn't sway with the wind. They stayed perfectly still, as if each pair were painted onto the night itself. Phil whispered, "Those aren't animals. Animals move." Josh swallowed hard. Are they watching us or waiting for us? The clicking sound intensified, spreading through the canopy like invisible chains snapping in sequence, each one closer than the last. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, intention. Jess held up her audio recorder, and the software struggled to process the layers of frequencies, producing only jittering, corrupted waveforms. "Something's communicating," she said, "but not with us, with each other." Leaves rustled overhead. Phil looked up, and his face drained of color. "Josh, they're above us!" Josh aimed his light upward and saw elongated silhouettes clinging to the branches like giant, malformed insects. Their limbs were wrong, too many joints, too much flexibility, and their skin, though pale, shimmered like something wet beneath tree bark. One of the creatures shifted its head, and its eyes caught their lights again, reflective, empty, almost metallic. Jess whispered, "We need to move, now!" They backed away slowly, trying not to disturb the forest floor, but with every step, the eyes followed, unblinking. The clicking stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, a deep vibration rolled under their feet as if something massive had shifted underground. Birds shot from the trees in a panicked wave. The foliage to the left exploded in motion as an enormous shadow darted between trunks, faster than anything that size should move. Jess screamed, "Go!" They ran, branches whipping across their faces, roots tripping their boots, the jungle closing in like it wanted to swallow them whole. Phil tried to keep his bearings, but the terrain twisted unnaturally. Trails they had walked earlier suddenly gone or rearranged. Josh looked back once and instantly wished he hadn't. One of the creatures was moving through the trees parallel to them, its limbs stretching unnaturally wide before snapping forward like a spider diving toward prey. Its skin wasn't pale anymore. It was glowing faintly, blue, like static electricity building in a storm. Phil shouted, "Left! The river! Go to the river!" Branches cracked behind them, heavy footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal. The eyes in the trees vanished all at once, as if something larger had stepped into their view, blotting out everything. Josh could feel it now. They weren't being hunted by multiple creatures. They were being herded toward something waiting ahead. The jungle opened into a clearing so suddenly that the Expedition X crew nearly stumbled into the river before realizing something was wrong. The water wasn't flowing. It lay perfectly still, smooth, black, and reflective like a sheet of polished obsidian. Even the moon's reflection looked distorted, bending and twisting as if the river itself were rejecting the light. Jess stepped back immediately. Rivers don't do that, not naturally. Josh tapped the surface with the end of his machete. A jolt of cold vibrated up the metal into his arm, sharp enough to make him gasp. Phil grabbed him. "Don't touch it! Not again!" Then the clicking began. began, not scattered, not random, a single deliberate pattern coming from deep inside the jungle. Each click echoed with equal spacing, almost like a coded pulse traveling through the tree. The hair on Jess's arms lifted. It's signaling something. A shape stepped out of the foliage. Tall, too tall. Its outline flickered like heat haze, as though the creature's body interfered with the air around it. When Jess raised her flashlight, the beam bent around the figure instead of landing on it, as if the creature existed in a place the light couldn't reach. Josh whispered, "That's not possible." The creature tilted its head, studying them with an intelligence that felt old, older than the jungle itself. The clicking stopped. The hum began. A low, bone-deep vibration rolled across the clearing, strong enough to make Phil's camera glitch in his hands. The screen filled with static and warped pixels. Jess shouted, "It's affecting the electronics!" Vines behind them suddenly twisted together, sealing off the path they came from. The forest itself was moving, trapping them. Josh grabbed their arms. "Go! The other way!" But the creature stepped forward, blocking the river. Its body pulsed with dim, blue-white strands that moved under its skin like flowing circuits. The hum grew louder, stronger. Jess buckled to one knee. Phil's camera fell to the ground, still recording, until the lens cracked on its own and shut off. Then, silence. The creature raised one long arm and pointed at the broken camera before vanishing in a sudden gust of wind that sent leaves spiraling. When Phil lunged for the camera, it was gone. "It took it," he whispered. "It didn't want proof." A moment later, the vines behind them unwound, revealing a narrow escape path. They didn't question it. They ran. Back at camp, the producers saw their faces, white, shaking, unable to speak, and shut down the shoot at sunrise. Every recording device malfunctioned, every battery drained. 2 weeks later, Phil received a package with no return address. Inside was his missing camera. Every file was wiped clean, except one, a 3-second clip of the motionless river, with a tall, luminous figure reflected in the water, staring back. Jessica Chobot was one of the driving forces behind Expedition X, bringing energy, mystery, and fearless investigation into the unknown. Fans believed she would be part of the team forever, but without warning, she stepped away. No big announcement, no explanation, only silence. Now, disturbing details are emerging from people close to production. What really happened behind the scenes? Tonight, we uncover the truth about Jessica's departure and the shocking reason the show may have crossed a line no one was prepared for. Before her exit became the subject of speculation and quiet industry conversations, Jessica Chobot was the pulse of Expedition X. She wasn't there just to narrate events or fill screen time. She shaped the identity of the show. Viewers trusted her because she brought something few investigators could: real curiosity and a calm willingness to walk into places that others refused. From day one, her role went beyond hosting. She acted as the voice of reason while still pushing forward into high-risk encounters, grounding each investigation with science-backed questions. While Phil Torres broke down data and patterns, Jessica humanized the search for answers, asking what ordinary people feared but never dared to speak publicly. Her background made her stand out. Before Expedition X, she spent years in investigative entertainment and story development, exploring the blurred line between fact and speculation. Her on-screen composure earned her respect from crew members who described her as the investigator who stayed last when everyone else packed up. Multiple production notes reveal that during Season 1, she was the only cast member to review 100% of post-investigation recordings personally. Even the uncut footage the network never aired. She often stayed in the command trailer long after others wrapped, replaying audio anomalies and unexplained radio bursts, frame by frame. According to one assistant producer, Jessica asked the kind of questions that could derail a narrative if answered truthfully, questions that made executives nervous. And that became part of the problem. Her dedication to uncovering whatever was actually happening, outside what could be marketed or packaged, made her indispensable, but also also increasingly at odds with the show's evolving tone. As the series gained popularity, pressure increased to amplify the spectacle. Jessica remained committed to reality. She wanted truth, even if the truth didn't fit the script. Her value came from authenticity. Ironically, that authenticity may be what ultimately led her straight toward the breaking point. As Expedition X advanced in popularity, production began shifting. Episodes needed heightened stakes, faster pacing, and more dramatic moments to compete with other paranormal and expedition-style shows. What started as a truth-forward investigative series gradually leaned toward entertainment, something viewers never saw coming. According to confidential post-production notes and off-record crew accounts, Jessica Chobot began quietly resisting these changes. She believed Expedition X was losing what made it unique, its grounding in real investigation over exaggerated spectacle. Behind the cameras, conversations reportedly grew tense. Producers pushed for more reaction-based footage, while Jessica pushed back, arguing that authentic reactions shouldn't be manufactured. According to a crew member present during the Season 3 strategy meetings, Jessica flatly refused to reenact moments that did not occur naturally during filming. She is quoted saying, "If we start pretending, we're not exploring anymore. We're just performing." As ratings pressure grew, so did the distance between what she felt was right and what executives wanted delivered. Even field operations were affected. Multiple crew members confirmed that in certain high-risk investigations, Jessica questioned why the team was being pushed deeper or staying longer solely for potential dramatic payoff. She expressed concerns about safety standards being adjusted for screen tension. One field tech later disclosed she was the only one who stopped and asked whether we should go in, not just whether we could. That didn't sit well with people focused on the numbers rather than survival. Rumors began circulating that something more was bothering her. She would appear completely calm on camera, but off-screen became noticeably withdrawn before episodes involving intense or questionable investigative setup. She developed a habit of reviewing every safety protocol herself, often rechecking equipment without prompting. One crew member described it as someone preparing not just for an investigation, but for impact. The tension escalated when Jessica began raising direct concerns during executive review calls. She insisted that several anomalies shown publicly were misleading due to selective editing. The more she spoke up, the more isolated she became within the leadership structure. This wasn't just creative disagreement, it was the start of a revelation she was never supposed to share. According to multiple insider accounts, the breaking point began during the filming of an episode deep in the Pacific Northwest, one that was never aired in its original form. The team had traveled to investigate reported hauntings and electromagnetic disturbances linked to abandoned Cold War-era tunnels. The location had a history of structural collapses and unstable power sources, but executives reportedly pushed for extended filming after initial readings failed to produce dramatic results. Jessica argued strongly against pushing the team deeper, citing physical danger and lack of emergency support. Her concerns were dismissed as overly cautious. That night, the monitoring equipment began registering extreme magnetic fluctuation. Unlike previous investigations, these readings didn't match typical geological interference. Crew members reported sudden interference on radios, unexplained nausea, and what one technician described as the sensation of pressure all around us, like being underwater without drowning. Footage from the thermal camera, according to sources familiar with the uncut files, captured a moving distortion that could not be matched to any environmental source. Jessica insisted the team pull out and review the data before continuing. Production reportedly pushed to keep rolling. Moments later, a lighting rig collapsed. While no one sustained severe injury, 2 crew members were treated for dizziness and minor trauma. Chobot was said to be the first to respond, helping stabilize equipment and calling for immediate extraction. Official production logs labeled the incident as weather-related malfunction, but crew on-site claimed the air was perfectly still. It wasn't just the physical incident that shifted her perspective. It was what she saw in the unedited footage later that night. Sources say she stayed alone reviewing the thermal imaging, noticing something moving in sync with the equipment failure. She reportedly wrote in a field journal entry, "If this is real, we should not be here. if it's not, someone wants us to believe it is. Either possibility was disturbing. The next morning, she confronted production staff about altering the narrative of what happened. She argued that the episode should either be scrapped or presented exactly as it occurred, including crew risk. Executives refused. That was the moment, according to insiders, that Jessica made her decision. She wasn't just questioning safety anymore. She was questioning whether the truth was being deliberately compromised. And from that moment forward, the clock began ticking on her departure from Expedition X. After the tunnel incident, Jessica Chobot pushed for a full internal review of both the safety protocols and the narrative structure of the show. She insisted that the thermal footage, the strange physiological symptoms experienced by the crew, and the raw audio anomalies all be preserved as is. But when rough cuts for the episode began to circulate, she discovered that pivotal moments had been strategically removed. The unexplained fluctuation in equipment readings was trimmed to appear inconclusive. Crew reactions to the pressure event were shortened and repackaged as brief equipment malfunction. Entire audio segments, where Jessica openly expressed concern about an immediate evacuation, were cut completely. According to one post-production specialist who remained anonymous, Jessica showed up at the editing room unannounced, requesting to review cut logs. What she saw left her stunned. In the metadata, timestamps indicated that footage had been flagged for removal even before the final team debrief. Internal notations reportedly labeled these clips as overly alarming, non-usable, and potentially damaging to series tone. Some of the distortions caught on thermal were said to be set aside for secondary analysis, but never resurfaced. It was as if the truth was archived, said the specialist quietly. Not erased, just buried. When she brought the issue up in the following production meeting, her concerns were dismissed as unnecessary escalation. Executives allegedly argued that showing the incident in full could make the network look irresponsible or foster fear among viewers. Jessica's counterpoint struck a nerve. If what we're investigating is real, downplaying it is a lie. If it's not real, and we act like it is, that's worse. Her words reportedly caused a long silence across the conference line. From that moment on, she was not just seen as cautious, but as a risk. Several crew members later confirmed that future scripts began subtly reducing her airtime during analytical segments. She was instructed to focus more on narration, while Phil Torres handled data-driven clarification. This restructuring was interpreted by some as an attempt to control how much of her skepticism made it onto camera. Word began spreading internally. Jessica was becoming too factual, too serious, and not in line with evolving direction. Behind closed doors, it was called a style shift, but according to those closest to her, she recognized it as something far more worrying. An effort to soften reality. She didn't leave because she stopped believing in the investigation. She left because the show stopped believing in the truth. In the months that followed the tunnel incident, the divide between Jessica Chobot and upper production widened beyond creative differences. According to internal messages referenced by a crew member, she repeatedly pushed for more transparency regarding field risks and for documentation to reflect the reality of what crews endured during extreme investigations. She warned that failure to report situations accurately could result in serious injury, or worse. Those concerns were quietly acknowledged but ultimately minimized for being overcautious and disruptive to episode pacing. Then something changed. Her concerns stopped being about filming and started focusing on people. While reviewing upcoming expedition plans for a season finale episode supposedly centered around airborne luminescent phenomena in an uninhabited region of the Arctic Circle, she noticed serious safety compromises. The location was listed as mostly stable, yet the latest geological assessments noted deep fracturing beneath the ice shelf, unstable satellite communication zones, and high electromagnetic interference readings. Jessica flagged the excursion as a red-level risk. The response from leadership shocked her. One executive replied that heightened risk equals heightened viewership. That answer deeply disturbed her. She began privately confiding in close colleagues that the push for more dangerous footage had crossed a line. One crew medic later disclosed that during a routine equipment inspection, Jessica approached him and asked, "How long do we have to flatten a rescue if something happens out there?" "Not in theory, in real time." "How many minutes?" When he answered, "Under optimal conditions, maybe 20. She reportedly responded with a single sentence, "The danger is not theoretical anymore." Weeks later, anonymous crew members claim Jessica started receiving brief, subtle administrative notes questioning her commitment to the show's vision. At first, simple reminders. Later, veiled phrasing about professional alignment and consistency with series objectives. To outsiders, it sounded harmless. To those familiar with production language, it was a warning. Then, it escalated. Ahead of a mid-season promotional shoot, Jessica was instructed to downplay prior concerns on camera and avoid addressing safety or authenticity-related issues in interviews. She pushed back, calmly but firmly. She wanted to talk about the importance of respecting both the history of paranormal inquiry and the people behind it. Reportedly, she was told that those themes were not currently a performance priority. That was when it became clear. Not only were her warnings being ignored, they were being actively suppressed. And once her advocacy for crew safety began interfering with planned expeditions, the internal stance shifted from disagreement to containment. For Jessica, that was no longer a creative difference. That was a line drawn in the sand. It didn't happen in a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no ultimatums. The moment Jessica Chobot truly decided she couldn't stay on Expedition X came during a routine prep briefing at the Los Angeles production office. The team was reviewing logistics for the next major shoot, a multi-week investigation in a remote mountainous region where locals claimed unexplained ground tremors were linked to an abandoned Cold War communications facility. Jessica had already flagged concerns about seismic instability in the area, citing a recent geological survey that warned of potential structural collapse inside the facility. She also pushed for additional personnel, a second medic, a thermal imaging technician, and another safety coordinator. The production reply came back with a single line: "Budget won't support additional redundancy. Team must operate lean." During the briefing, one producer suggested using drones and remote cameras to avoid unnecessary entry into dangerous areas. Jessica agreed. But then another senior figure shut it down in front of everyone, saying, "It won't cut well for episode energy. We need real human proximity to the activity." Those in the room described that the air went still. Jessica didn't argue. She simply stared across the table for a moment, then slowly leaned forward and asked, "At what point does energy outweigh survival?" According to an insider, no one responded. Later that night, Jessica returned to her hotel and began quietly organizing essential files: early treatment documents, unreleased field reports, private notes from key investigations. She left a message for a high-level network liaison expressing her decision to pause involvement pending a full review of safety protocol and content approach. 2 days later, during an informal call, she made it official. She would step away from filming. She didn't give a dramatic speech. She simply said she could no longer stand behind an environment where verification and risk calculation were seen as obstacles rather than necessities. That call wasn't widely publicized, but internally, it landed like a seismic shift. Some crew members reportedly cried. Others, who had quietly raised similar concerns but felt powerless, described it as the moment someone finally stood up. A production assistant later recalled Jessica telling him, "There's bravery in chasing answers, but there's also bravery in refusing to ignore consequences." Shortly after, Jessica's departure was labeled a creative transition in public statements. But those who were there know better. She didn't walk away because she lost interest. She walked away because the mission changed. And the part of that mission she believed in, truth, caution, respect for forces we don't fully understand, was no longer driving the show's direction. Jessica Chobot didn't speak publicly right away. When her departure was first announced, headlines framed it as a career reprioritization or a shift toward new media ventures. The official press line said she was focusing on creative development, but people who worked alongside her say that behind the silence was something heavier, something she struggled with long after stepping away. It wasn't the physical risks alone that pushed her out. It was the direction investigations were taking, and how far the production was increasingly willing to go to capture something, even when there was nothing left to capture safely. According to one editor who worked on late-season episodes, Jessica began pushing back against what she called pattern forcing. She noticed that sometimes, when field data didn't support the narrative the team expected, conversations would subtly shift toward filming more speculation than verification. She reportedly told a producer, "We are not supposed to create mystery. We are supposed to explore it." The response she got wasn't hostile, but it wasn't supportive either. It was neutral. The audience wants closure. In private, she described frustration with how post-production occasionally reshaped events. Instances where equipment malfunction was labeled as unexplained force. A night where wind rattled a door frame, but was edited to seem like intentional movement. Nothing fabricated outright, but just enough assisted ambiguity, as one crew member put it, to make the episode lean toward suspense over science. What troubled Jessica most wasn't dishonesty, it was the momentum behind it. Ratings pressure led decision-makers to push the boundaries of what qualified as evidence. In one internal review meeting, she questioned whether they were truly documenting phenomena or unintentionally dramatizing fear. The room reportedly went quiet before someone said, "It depends how you define documentation." That moment stuck with her, because to her, the definition hadn't changed. Following this, Jessica began consulting outside experts privately to confirm whether her observations aligned with responsible investigative practice. The consensus was clear. If hesitation exists due to ethics or safety, pause. Otherwise, you're not investigating, you're simply producing. That was the point she couldn't ignore. It wasn't that things got too strange, it was that things stopped being strange for the right reasons. She didn't leave because she was afraid of the unknown. She left because she was afraid of what would happen if they pretended to know more than they did. For months after leaving Expedition X, Jessica Chobot remained quiet. She didn't want her departure to ignite controversy or damage the show's legacy. She respected her colleagues, acknowledged the skill behind the production, and believed many people involved still cared about doing things right. But as rumors began circulating, claims that she'd left due to drama, arguments, or losing interest, she agreed to privately address a small group of industry insiders. What she revealed was simple, calm, and unsettling. She explained that there was a moment during one of their final shoots, a nighttime investigation in a structurally compromised mining complex, when camera operators were positioning inside a corridor that local experts had red-flagged due to collapse risk. She requested the team regroup outside until daylight. Instead, executives pushed to get just a few usable shots. While nothing catastrophic happened, a large sheet of metal dropped from overhead support minutes later, narrowly missing a crew member by less than 3 feet. She described the sound as the wake-up call I had been ignoring. It wasn't paranormal that nearly caused harm, it was negligence. She didn't name names. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but she made it very clear. Excellence in exploration cannot exist without responsibility, and when that responsibility is traded for shock value, even subtlety, the mission dilutes into spectacle. Her closing statement reportedly stunned the room. "We don't chase answers to create fear. We chase answers because fear is often the first sign there's something worth understanding." Since then, insiders say Jessica has been quietly consulting on responsible production guidelines for high-risk nonfiction programming. She hasn't ruled out returning to TV, but only if the format prioritizes reality over dramatization, safety over spectacle, and truth over trend. She isn't exposing Expedition X to tear it down. She's reminding future explorers what happens when the mystery becomes more important than the people chasing it. And that, according to those closest to the show, is the real reason Jessica Chobot walked away. Just moments ago, Josh Gates finally confirmed what Expedition X viewers have suspected all along. There was footage captured during one investigation that the network refused to air, and it wasn't because of technical issues. According to Gates, What the team recorded that night was so disturbing that executives ordered the raw files locked immediately, and several crew members required medical attention afterward. A producer allegedly never returned to the field. What Josh just revealed explains why that episode will never be seen by the public. Make sure to subscribe if you want the full story as it unfolds. It was billed as a standard mid-season investigation, remote location, sparse documentation, and just enough local folklore to warrant a risk assessment. The Expedition X team was dispatched to an abandoned weather relay station originally decommissioned in the early 1990s, following a string of unexplained signal anomalies. Phil Torres and Jessica Chobot were accompanied by 2 additional camera techs and a single remote operator stationed half a mile away to monitor telemetry. According to internal production notes, they were only scheduled to be on site for 4 hours. The first hour ran smoothly. Field readings were normal, atmospheric pressure stable, battery levels well within range. Then, 79 minutes in, every piece of equipment registered a simultaneous frequency spike, followed by a complete blackout in the area surrounding the station. Not a malfunction, but a controlled interference, triggering only when Phil stepped into what was later marked Zone Delta. Crew accounts describe an immediate drop in air density, as if something displaced the oxygen itself. Jessica reported hearing static as though her headset was picking up a voice trying to form words. Phil described it differently. Not interference, but intention. He said it felt like something was aware of their presence and adjusting to their observation. The ambient temperature log recorded a 5-degree fall within 13 seconds, which normally would indicate a weather shift, but wind detectors showed no airflow. Multiple cameras began recording compression artifacts shaped like silhouettes, even though no movement was visible to the naked eye. At 1 hour, 42 minutes in, one of the technicians collapsed, reporting sharp chest pressure and blurred vision. His vitals spiked, and he was pulled outside immediately. But even after extraction, his microphone still registered the same low, rhythmic distortion, exactly in sync with his heartbeat. What happened next led the network to place a hard stop on even reviewing the rest of the footage, and the next 12 minutes are what forced Expedition X into silence, until Josh Gates broke it today. What followed in the aftermath of the technician collapsing would later be described in an internal incident report as a non-standard medical emergency under unidentified environmental influence. Jessica and Phil dragged him beyond the perimeter while radioing the remote operator for immediate extraction. But before transport could be arranged, every headset and monitoring channel emitted an identical 2-second audio burst that none of them had heard before, almost like a distorted breath overlaid with a single, indecipherable word spoken backwards. When slowed down afterward during medical review, the waveform formed a perfect rhythmic pattern matching the subject's respiratory cycle. He regained consciousness moments later, but claimed he hadn't passed out, only stepped outside of his body. Psychological protocol required instant suspension from further filming. As standard safety measures kicked in, the team was ordered to return to base camp. Yet removing the equipment did little to stop what they were experiencing. Even outside Zone Delta, battery drains continued at accelerated rates, as if something was attached to the devices themselves, not the surroundings. Live uplink verification failed 3 consecutive attempts. The remote operator, who remained physically removed from the event, reported through a restricted channel that his screen showed camera feeds trying to adjust for a non-existent focal point. His exact words were logged, like it was tracking something that wasn't in front of them, almost behind. That note triggered the next step. Network HQ, already receiving fragmented telemetry data, intervened. Over a secure channel, production was ordered to execute what's officially known as a Phase 7 reset, meaning equipment shutoff, immediate departure, and containment protocol enacted without post-investigation discussion. Only used 5 times in network history, It's reserved for extreme risk scenarios. The moment this order was given, the generators powering the relay station failed completely, not due to damage, but because the breaker flipped itself, despite being physically padlocked. The final recorded image before black screen? A blurred figure appearing between Phil and the technician, visible only on one camera angle. That frame was the last thing reviewed before access to the footage was sealed. The next 24 hours would determine whether Expedition X would even return to production. By the time the team arrived back at the staging area, the incident had already reached senior production executives. Initial assessments categorized the event as equipment and personnel compromise under unknown influence. Standard protocol dictated that footage be cataloged and forwarded for technical analysis. But before that process began, Josh Gates personally intervened, reportedly dialing into the emergency debrief via secure uplink just 31 minutes after the team returned. Though he wasn't physically on location, his role as lead executive producer granted him override authorization. What he heard during that debrief changed the entire approach. Jessica, still visibly shaken, described the moment the blackout occurred as if something reacted to us noticing it. She emphasized it wasn't merely environmental, but responsive, like the area itself shifted once the team acknowledged what they had detected. Phil echoed this sentiment but stated it differently. According to debrief transcripts, he said, "We weren't just documenting something unknown. We were seen, and it didn't want to be filmed." The technician who collapsed remained mostly silent, but when asked what he experienced, he reportedly whispered, "It doesn't want to stay where it is." His statement caused the call to go silent. Gates immediately requested raw file access to personally evaluate the telemetry sync and thermal imaging data before network review. That request was approved, but only under executive privacy restrictions, meaning only he and two senior analysts at headquarters could see it. Within hours, Gates confirmed privately that the footage captured sustained spatial compression inconsistent with known phenomena, implying intentional movement within the field of vision. Insiders say he told network leadership, "What's on that feed suggests more than activity. It suggests awareness." But instead of escalating to promotional material, Josh made a decision that surprised even executive staff. He demanded the footage be restricted from post-production entirely until external consultation could be arranged, refusing to allow even internal editors access. This marked the first time in Expedition X history where the lead host initiated content lockdown against network recommendation. That move triggered a series of legal evaluations that would ultimately determine the fate of the footage and of the episode. What Gates discovered in the raw thermal layer would make his next decision unavoidable. When Josh Gates accessed the restricted thermal and IR-enhanced playback, he expected to find corrupted imaging caused by equipment stress or compression glitches. Instead, what he saw is what insiders now believe prompted the network to permanently seal the segment. At precisely the moment the technician collapsed, the thermal feed from camera 3 captured what appeared to be a human-shaped distortion, positioned several feet behind Phil Torres. But unlike typical heat signatures, it showed negative thermal feedback, meaning it absorbed infrared rather than emitting it. This anomaly remained still for 2 seconds, then shifted subtly toward the lens without registering surface heat, breathing patterns, or any identifiable form of locomotion. Yet on the raw spectral enhancement, the shape's internal structure briefly displayed pattern-like movements resembling pulse fluctuations. The timestamp aligned exactly with the technician's sudden chest pain. The strangest part wasn't the silhouette itself, but what happened in the following few frames. As the blackout wave rolled through the equipment, the figure appeared to pivot, its form reacting to Phil's flashlight beam, even though infrared detection shouldn't respond to visible light. According to project files, Josh replayed the sequence 14 times before noticing a chilling detail. On the metadata overlay, The anomaly carried an exact posture match and height ratio to a weather technician who disappeared at the same location in 1987, whose last known transmission mentioned signal distortions following him. The disappearance was never solved. Immediately after this realization, the remainder of the playback started showing cascading compression blocks that didn't behave like standard digital artifacts. Instead of random pixelation, they consistently formed in a curved arc pattern behind Jessica, almost mimicking a slow, deliberate reach. Analysts attempted to isolate individual frames and manually reconstruct data, but buffer overlays repeatedly replaced any image refinement with low-frequency tones similar to lab-recorded infrasound stress patterns. One frame, which only remained fully intact for a fraction of a second, showed the silhouette inches from the camera before the feed cut completely. The shape's head appeared turned directly toward the lens. No facial detail, no visible structure, just density displacement, like compressed air forming a rough human outline. Josh reportedly turned off the feed and stated, "It's aware of the camera." After reviewing the footage, he requested immediate cessation of all attempts to digitally enhance or stabilize it, citing risk to personnel if further exposure triggered physiological aftereffects. But by then, viewing the footage may have already resulted in deeper consequences than anyone expected. Following Josh Gates's private review of the footage, Network Compliance initiated what insiders refer to as a black vault submission. This process is typically reserved for legal disputes, internal misconduct, or content deemed potentially dangerous if aired without regulatory evaluation. But this wasn't standard risk management. The footage wasn't just locked away, it was categorized under a rarely used contractual clause known as Section 7.4c, non-broadcastable incident content, originally added to protect the network from liability in cases involving locations tied to active criminal investigation. Expedition X had never triggered it before. The clause permits immediate suppression of media that could incite hazardous imitation behavior, promote exploration of restricted areas, or cause psychological impact beyond normal entertainment parameters. That language was drafted for urban exploration scenarios and disaster sites, not paranormal investigation. Yet legal determined the footage qualified after reviewing transcript excerpts that reportedly described environmental reactions directly tied to the crew's presence. One internal assessment read, "Activity seems responsive. Risk of human replication if aired." In other words, if people saw it, they might try to go there. Network Legal also flagged the local government's historical records regarding the 1987 disappearance connected to the abandoned weather relay station. That case was never declared closed, which means, because the figure in the footage matched the missing technician's biometric outline, the broadcast could be interpreted as evidence in a potential ongoing investigation. Even though the events occurred decades ago, airing it could open legal complications, including demands for forensic analysis or allegations of interference with a possibly unsolved death. What sealed the footage permanently wasn't just fear of public reaction, it was a leaked production memo from the on-site medical specialist who treated the collapsed crew member. In her write-up, she stated, "Patient displays stress markers consistent with post-traumatic attunement. He believes the encounter might not be geographically bound." The phrase, "not geographically bound," was underlined by multiple attorneys. That line alone escalated the content from restricted to sealed indefinite. Josh argued that suppressing data went against the scientific integrity of the show, but legal countered with potential lawsuits, and worse, psychological fallout for viewers. After a tense meeting, Gates reportedly agreed not to push for release, saying only, "If this becomes entertainment, we've already lost control of it." What none of the executives knew at that moment was that another copy of the footage existed, one stored automatically on a field hard drive no one accounted for. And that's the file that resurfaced days later. Days after the footage was sealed, a back-end systems check flagged a secondary storage device, a rugged field hard drive that had been left in the mobile monitoring station during the shutdown. It had captured a full sync copy before the blackout. A junior post-production tech, unaware of the legal hold, accessed it while compiling camera logs. What he saw prompted him to immediately forward the data to the medical specialist who had treated the collapsed crew member. That led to the most alarming entry in the internal file chain, the psychological incident memo. The specialist noted that while his physical condition stabilized, the technician reported a persistent sensation of being watched from somewhere that isn't behind me, more like beneath. He stated he felt something still tracking his heartbeat, even hours after removal from the site, despite no biological abnormalities. Further testing showed his neural response spiked whenever playback of the footage began, even when muted. He reportedly told her, "If you show that to anyone who isn't ready, it might follow them too." That line triggered immediate psychiatric evaluation. But the most disturbing element came from the junior tech's observation. In his incident report, he wrote, "I fast-forwarded through the final 30 seconds. The image distortion briefly shifts into the corner, like it sees the reflection of the monitor. Then, at the exact moment the technician wakes after collapsing, a noise comes through the audio track. But the gain settings were at 0. No microphone was on." Following this discovery, the tech requested reassignment and refused to work night hours. Within 48 hours, his report was integrated into the legal file, and the secondary drive was seized. That incident directly resulted in the file being classified at an even higher level, no longer under broadcast restriction, but under internal non-exposure protocol. And that's when Josh Gates was told something that changed his stance permanently. Someone else had already watched the file, alone, and what they reported next would shake even him. Before the secondary hard drive was confiscated, at least one individual managed to watch the final minutes alone, without supervision or biometric monitoring. That person was a mid-level producer assigned to verify damaged media files before they were formally archived. According to his unsigned internal statement, he viewed the footage late at night, believing it was simply corrupted audio-visual data. What happened during those minutes escalated the crisis beyond what Gates or network executives anticipated. He reported that while scrubbing through the footage frame by frame, the anomaly seemed to shift in behavior. Rather than remaining static as earlier versions showed, it gradually began tracking the camera's perspective, adjusting as though aware of his interaction with it. He claimed that at approximately 1:43:14 into the recording, the shape moved slightly closer each time he paused. Thinking it was playback lag, he checked latency. There was none. Then, in the last clean frame before auto-corruption began, the silhouette appeared directly aligned with the camera lens, positioned at eye level. He stated that although no face was visible, he felt acknowledged. What unsettled investigators was what happened afterward. System logs recorded a spike in room temperature despite no HVAC adjustments. He abruptly exited the server room, logged off without filing verification, and drove home without explaining to staff. When contacted the next morning, he claimed he had no memory of leaving work. His vehicle GPS showed he made an unscheduled stop at the investigation location's general vicinity over 3 hours away before returning home. He tendered his resignation the next day, citing irreversible exposure to subject matter beyond broadcast intent. His final note read, "We didn't expose it, it exposed us, and it knows the difference." Following this, external auditory forensic specialists were brought in against standard protocol. What they discovered inside the recording led to the most controversial decision in Expedition X history. The forensic specialists were asked to analyze the final retained audio signal, something the network hoped would help attribute the interference to an explainable anomaly. Instead, their report stated the waveform exhibited frequency structuring matching intentional rhythmic sequencing. Put plainly, it looked like something was responding to the monitoring equipment, forming signal patterns that, under slow playback, sounded eerily similar to controlled breathing. One analyst concluded that the reading was consistent with a presence attempting to regulate or sync with an external biological system. That system was later cross-referenced with the collapsed crew member's cardiac rhythm. When this was relayed to Josh Gates, he reportedly remained silent for nearly 10 seconds before responding. According to two sources familiar with the meeting, he finally said, "If this becomes televised entertainment, we're responsible for what comes next." That statement, more than the footage itself, led led to the final decision: permanent suppression. The network declared the episode unrecoverable. Personnel involved were barred from public discussion, and the location was struck from production clearance lists. Earlier today, Josh Gates was asked about the infamous unaired episode during a live interview. Rather than repeating the standard technical failure explanation, he paused and said, "Some footage isn't meant to be broadcast because of what it does to the people who filmed it, and sometimes because of what it tries to do afterward." He didn't elaborate, but the panel fell silent. That was the first public acknowledgement that what was filmed had active impact. He ended the segment with, "We shut it down to protect the crew. Some things aren't scared to be found. They're waiting to be noticed." The interview cut to break immediately. No further questions were allowed.